Lawmakers on the House Oversight Committee threatening contempt of Congress charges against the newly fired Attorney General Pam Bondi if she does not testify about her handling of the Epstein files next week. The Justice Department tried to give her cover today, saying, quote, because Ms. Bondi no longer can testify in her official capacity as Attorney General, the department's position is that the subpoena no longer obligates her to appear next week. The top Democrat on that panel now threatening to hold her in contempt of Congress. And he may just get support from the Republicans on the committee, at least Representative Nancy Mace, who led the subpoena effort in the first place. Congresswoman Mace posting this today. Pam Bondi cannot escape accountability. The American people deserve answers, and we expect her to appear as soon as a new date is set. My political sources are back with me and joined by my legal source, the former federal prosecutor, Ellie Honig. Ellie, so the DOJ says she's not Attorney General, subpoena's not valid. True?
Hey everyone, Dr. John here. So what just happened, guys? Now that Pam Bondi is out of office and no longer shielded by the DOJ, the people she trampled are coming for her, and they're not holding back. It's instant karma, and it sends a clear message to everyone still inside the Trump regime. The protection doesn't last forever, and your conduct follows you out the door.
No, that's a bogus argument, John. So here's why. A subpoena is simply a command to a witness to provide relevant information if they have any. As we sit here right now, former Attorney General Pam Bondi has the exact same information that she had a week ago when she was still the sitting AG. Now, DOJ has come up with this distinction of, well, she's not the AG anymore, therefore the subpoena is invalid. First of all, the subpoena is to Pam Bondi. It's not to current occupant of the office. Second of all, if that subpoena meant whoever the current AG is, DOJ would be offering up Todd Blanche, which they're not doing. And third of all, John, this committee has already subpoenaed several prior AGs, including Eric Holder, including Bill Barr, and including Merrick Garland. So this remains valid.
A very prestigious group called Lawyers Defending American Democracy, along with a broad coalition, including the Democracy Defenders Fund, Lawyers for the Rule of Law, distinguished former judges, and prominent ethics professors, has filed a detailed ethics complaint against Pam Bondi in Florida, where she is admitted to practice law. This is a 23-page complaint seeking an investigation by the Florida Bar and sanctions for unethical conduct.
Democratic Congressman Garcia, the ranking member, says he would try to hold her in contempt if she doesn't appear. How would you expect that to play out? They wouldn't have the votes, would they?
So the Oversight Committee, all the Democrats would need to be joined by 3 Republicans on the committee to get a majority. So we know Nancy Mace is one. Will they have 2 others? Who knows? If it gets through the Oversight Committee, then it goes to the full House. But here's the thing, John. If the full House votes contempt, then it goes over to DOJ for potential prosecution. I am quite certain Todd Blanche will not authorize a prosecution of Pam Bondi. But it's worth saying, for a DOJ, Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche alike, who love to congratulate themselves for being the most transparent in history, that'd be a bad look to take a contempt charge from the Oversight Committee or the full House.
Quick one here. Is it possible they may have to reissue the subpoena for Pam Bondi citizen, not Pam Bondi Attorney General?
The complaint alleges that on Bondi's very first day in office, she sent a memo to all Department of Justice employees that placed lawyers in an untenable position, forcing them to either violate their own ethical obligations or comply with her directive. The complaint focuses on 3 recent cases where lawyers were terminated or forced to resign as a result of demands made either by Bondi or her senior management team.
Well, it's clear that the DOJ failed to comply with the law. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was very clear. All the files had to be released with a narrow category of redactions allowed. They missed the deadline to release the files. They still haven't released 2.5 to 3 million files, and they illegally redacted thousands of files. And they don't want her to testify because we would ask her questions about that. Who made the decision to illegally redact certain files? Who made the decision to stop releasing files before the law was fully complied with? What conversations, if any, took place with President Trump about those decisions? They don't want her to answer questions like that. I think it's quite clear.
It's striking because there have been a number of people who have had very high profile roles, including a former president of the United States, who have had to answer questions. You're talking about officials who talked to your committee like the Attorney General Bill Barr.
These demands would have required those lawyers to take actions that violate their own obligations under the rules of professional responsibility. The complaint identifies and explains in detail the ethical rules that were violated in each instance. Now, as this distinguished bipartisan group files files their ethics complaint, Democrats are making something else very clear. Bondi needs to show up for her deposition in the House of Representatives. She was subpoenaed. She is still Pam Bondi, even though she no longer holds the title of Attorney General.
Alex Acosta, obviously the person behind the sweetheart deal in Florida. Others, even Hillary Clinton did her deposition as well. So talk to me about how the survivors are feeling about the prospect of the DOJ trying to get her not to comply with what they say is no longer a relevant subpoena, because they say you must have meant her official capacity, even though you said Pam Bondi.
Well, I think it's another betrayal of the survivors who have courageously and continuously called for transparency and accountability. And that's what we're fighting for and pushing for. Look, the legal argument that because she's no longer Attorney General, the subpoena is no longer valid or doesn't apply to her is laughable on its face. The purpose of the subpoena is to get information relevant to our investigation. That information is in Pam Bondi's head. It was in her head before she was fired. It's in her head today after she's been fired. She needs to show up on April 14th, fulfill her legal obligation, comply with the subpoena, and answer our questions under oath.
Contempt is always one pathway to do so. There are obviously different ways. There's the civil contempt, a much more lengthy procedure involving a judge. There's criminal contempt, referring it back to her very own department, or sergeant at arms taking her into custody. What is the likelihood of any of those mechanisms working when DOJ is probably certain not to refer her or to prosecute her in some way?
And the message is simple. If you made Hillary Clinton sit for a deposition, you have to show up for this one. Bondi does not have the immunities and protections anymore that she might have been able to invoke as acting Attorney General. Frankly, it was never clear how she was going to wiggle out of this, even with that title. But now, as a private citizen, her options have evaporated. One of the most important things Democrats are going to ask Bondi about is her connection to the Epstein files.
Well, I think with this DOJ, certainly the contempt avenue most likely to succeed would be the civil avenue, which, as you pointed out, would go to the courts and could lead to the imposition of fines, including fines levied each day that she fails to appear and comply with a subpoena. I think that's a very valid and possible option. We might also choose to pursue that criminal contempt option and put DOJ in the position of refusing to prosecute and move forward. I think that would highlight again for the American people the extent of this Trump administration cover-up of the Epstein files.
There have been those who have commented and that they believe that you were fine with the Clintons obstructing their subpoenas. That was the phrasing they used for 7 months, and voted against holding them in contempt, telling you to relax, go touch grass was part of the tweet about you. But talk to me about why this is distinguishable from your decision to not try to hold them in contempt.
Well, actually, I voted to hold the Clintons in civil contempt.
Not criminal.
That's right. I didn't support criminal contempt because I don't think that would have got us the outcome that we wanted to, which was to have a conversation. I do think it's important to separate Bill and Hillary Clinton here. And I said this throughout that episode. Hillary Clinton had no information, zero, zip, zilch, nada about Epstein, no relationship. The only reason she was forced to
That is something that is not getting enough attention. Obviously, everyone wants to know about the cover-up. But there is something else that needs to be asked. In light of reporting about how Donald Trump got an opinion from the Department of Justice claiming the Presidential Records Act is unconstitutional, and he does not have to follow it, meaning he could just shred all his documents. We need to know from Pam Bondi how she communicated with Donald Trump. Was it text messages, encrypted apps, direct messages? What numbers does he use? How are cabinet-level people speaking with the president? Those questions might sound more boring, but they give a roadmap. They build out the infrastructure of how this administration operates in the shadows. Now, Todd Blanche held his first official press conference as the acting attorney general, and he was asked directly whether Pam Bondi lost her job because she was not successful in prosecuting Trump's political foes or because she botched the cover-up of the Epstein files. His answer was telling, but the real insight comes from those who have been watching this disaster unfold. Let me bring in the perspective of legal experts who have been tracking this. Bondi was in a cocoon. She had one rule and one rule only: loyalty to Trump. Now that she is in the open field at every turn, there are people with knives out. The group that filed the ethics complaint is genuinely eminent. What is interesting is that this is actually a resubmission of something they filed back in June. At that time, there was doublespeak from the Florida bar. Were they investigating? Were they not? The reason they filed so quickly now is because the comment period has closed on a rule that Bondi herself proposed, a rule designed to keep state bars from having effective discipline against Department of Justice attorneys. 99% of the comments were virulently negative about this rule, but everyone expects they will issue it anyway. That is why the coalition wanted to get their complaints in under the gun. This complaint serves as a reminder of just how atrocious an Attorney General Bondi was. And the worst was yet to come. All the reprisal prosecutions were still ahead. The complaint cites the firing of a lawyer who is now a whistleblower. His great sin was telling the truth to a judge. Bondi specifically chastised him for not supporting Trump. Then there was the chief of the criminal division in Washington who was ordered to do an investigation that violated the principles of prosecution. She refused and resigned. And finally, there was the notorious example where the head of the public integrity section was forced into a room and told that someone was going to dismiss a case against a major political figure. They were told to lie and call it not a righteous case, or everyone would be fired. Those were the first heavy-handed acts from Bondi, acts that have since been superseded by even worse behavior. We have not seen the last of these complaints, not by a long shot. In terms of the subpoena, it is directed to Pam Bondi personally. There is no specific reason for her to avoid it. The acting attorney general suggested that Bondi already went and answered questions, but that was not under oath. Democrats said outright that they do not trust Pam Bondi. They do not think what she says is truthful. They want her to raise her right hand and swear an oath. Bondi actually left a voluntary interview because she refused to commit to the subpoena. So there is going to be a high noon showdown on April 14th. That is next Tuesday. Everyone will be watching to see what she does. Bondi is now in a whole new game. She is in the open field. She says there is some great private sector job waiting for her. But unlike others like Alina Habba, she did not get a cushy landing pad within government. She is somehow going out to the private sector, but she is going to be fighting the consequences of her Faustian bargain for the entire time she served. Breaking the law, breaking constitutional norms, not doing justice without fear or favor, but instead doing everything to please Donald Trump. Now the time has come for her to face the music. This ethics complaint is just the first overture of what is going to be a whole symphony of complaints against her. Let me break down exactly why this matters so much and what it means for Bondi and for everyone else in the Trump administration who thought they could act with impunity. The ethics complaint filed by lawyers defending American democracy is not some partisan hit job. This is a bipartisan coalition. These are distinguished former judges, prominent ethics professors, lawyers with the best reputations across political parties and ideologies. They saw what Bondi did to the Justice Department, and they are saying that conduct cannot stand. The complaint details how on her very first day in office, Bondi sent a memo that placed every DOJ lawyer in an impossible position. Follow the law and violate her directive, or follow her directive and violate your own ethical obligations. That is not leadership. That is coercion. That is abuse of power. The three cases highlighted in the complaint are particularly damning. First, the firing of a lawyer who told the truth to a judge. That lawyer is now a whistleblower. Bondi chastised him not for any procedural error or legal mistake, but for not supporting Trump. That is not a legitimate basis for firing a Justice Department attorney. That is retaliation for failing to show personal loyalty to the president. Second, the chief of the criminal division in Washington was ordered to conduct an investigation that violated the core principles of prosecution. She refused and she resigned. That is a prosecutor with integrity choosing to leave rather than compromise her ethics. Bondi created that situation. Third, the case involving the public integrity section, where lawyers were essentially told to lie about a case or lose their jobs. They were forced into a room and told that someone had to dismiss a case against a political ally. They were told to call it not righteous, even if it was. That is corruption. That is using the Justice Department as a political weapon. These are not minor infractions. These are fundamental violations of the rules of professional responsibility. And Bondi was the Attorney General. She was the top law enforcement officer in the country. She took an oath to uphold the Constitution, to do justice without fear or favor. Instead, she turned the Justice Department into a personal protection service for Donald Trump. Now that she is out of office, the consequences are arriving. The Florida bar has a duty to investigate ethics complaints against its members. Bondi is admitted to practice law in Florida. That means she is subject to the Florida bar's disciplinary process. If the bar finds that she violated ethical rules, she could face sanctions ranging from a reprimand to suspension to disbarment. Losing her law license would be devastating. It would strip her of her identity as a lawyer. It would prevent her from practicing in any state. It would be a public acknowledgement that she is unfit to be a member of the legal profession. And given the strength of the complaint, given the documented evidence, given the bipartisan nature of the coalition that filed it, the chances of serious sanctions are high. But the ethics complaint is not the only problem Bondi is facing. There is also the congressional subpoena. The House of Representatives has demanded that Bondi appear for a deposition on April 14th. This is not a voluntary interview. This is a compulsory process. Bondi is legally required to show up and answer questions under oath. If she refuses, she could be held in contempt of Congress. That could lead to criminal charges. That could lead to jail time. Democrats are not messing around. They made it clear that they do not trust Bondi. They do not believe her voluntary statements. They want her under oath where lying is a crime. What do they want to ask her? Everything. The Epstein cover-up is at the top of the list. Bondi was the Attorney General when the Epstein files were being handled. What did she know? When did she know it? What did she do to bury the truth? But there are other questions too. How did Bondi communicate with Trump? What apps did they use? What phone numbers? What was the chain of command for covering up misconduct? These questions might seem technical, but they are crucial. They build a roadmap of how this administration operates. They expose the infrastructure of corruption. The acting Attorney General tried to wave away the subpoena. He suggested that Bondi already answered questions. But that was a voluntary interview, not under oath. Democrats walked out of that interview because Bondi refused to commit to a subpoena. They want her under oath. They want her to face real consequences if she lies. And they are absolutely right to demand that. This is a high noon showdown. Bondi has a choice. She can comply with the subpoena, show up, raise her right hand, and answer questions. Or she can refuse and face contempt of Congress. Either way, she loses. If she complies, she has to answer questions about her misconduct, about the Epstein cover-up, about her communications with Trump. If she refuses, she becomes a fugitive from congressional process. There is no good option for her. That is what karma looks like. Let me talk about what Bondi's future holds. She says she has a great private sector job waiting for her. But does she really? What law firm wants to hire an attorney general who was fired, who is under ethics investigation, who is facing a congressional subpoena, who is being accused of violating professional responsibility rules? What client would trust her? What partner would want to work with her? Her reputation is in tatters. Her credibility is destroyed. And unlike some other Trump officials who landed cushy jobs within the administration, Bondi is being pushed out into the cold. She does not have a landing pad. She is on her own. And here is the thing, Trump might eventually pardon her. He might give her a blanket pardon for any federal crimes. But a pardon does not erase an ethics complaint. A pardon does not make the Florida bar go away. A pardon does not restore her reputation. A pardon does not make law firms want to hire her. She is going to be fighting the consequences of her actions for a long time. Every day, there will be a new complaint. Every week, there will be a new investigation. Every month, there will be a new revelation about what she did. The symphony of consequences has just begun. This should be a warning to everyone in the Trump administration. Your conduct has consequences. The shield of office does not last forever. Eventually, you become a private citizen again. And when that happens, the people you trampled, the laws you broke, the ethics you violated, all of it comes back. There is a life outside the cult. There is a life outside the regime, but you have to be willing to live in it. And if you spent your entire time in office burning bridges and breaking rules, you are going to find that life very lonely. Bondi made a Faustian bargain. She sold her integrity for proximity to power. She broke the law to please Trump. She violated her ethical obligations to keep her job. And now the bill has come due. She is facing an ethics complaint from a bipartisan coalition of distinguished lawyers and judges. She is facing a congressional subpoena that she cannot easily evade. She is facing a future of investigation and sanctions and public humiliation. And honestly, it could not be happening to a more deserving person. Let me leave you with this. The rule of law only works if it applies to everyone. If the Attorney General can violate ethical rules with impunity, if the President can shred records without consequence, if the powerful can trample the weak and walk away, then we do not have rule of law. We have rule by the powerful. But when the system works, when ethics complaints are filed, when subpoenas are enforced, when consequences arrive, that is democracy defending itself. That is the system holding people accountable. That is justice. Pam Bondi is about to learn that lesson the hard way. The ethics complaint will proceed, the Florida bar will investigate, the congressional subpoena will be enforced, and Bondi will have to answer for what she did. She can try to hide, she can try to evade, she can try to claim she did nothing wrong, but the evidence is there. The complaints are detailed, the witnesses are ready, and the consequences are coming. This is brutal karma. This is the past coming back to ruin her life, and it is only the beginning.